Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. We know it's the start of the second week in Cannes, and the energy levels are going a little bit down, so it's a high appreciation for being here in the room. My name is Tamara. I'm the head of program called MEDICI, the film funding journey, proposed by Focal, that is one of the co-organizers of the panel, together with Väst, the biggest regional film fund in Sweden, and the leadership teams of both organizations are here in the room, and we are very happy to be proposing this short focused interventions for the fourth year, already in cooperation with Marché du Film, and I would like to use this opportunity to thank Anahit. I don't know if she's here somewhere, Anahit and Nino, for very good cooperation and preparations that you are always offering us. I was also asked by the team of Marché to remind everyone that this year the market has access to the accessibility tools, so if anyone needs any kind of a transcript or support, the program is also going live, so you should just scan the QR code and there's a lot on offer. So what do we normally do in these panels proposed here? We really cherish the cooperation having with Väst, and particularly with its strategy department, let's say, because we always try to take one or two topics out of a publication called Public Financing on the Crossroads. We identify one topic that we feel is particularly relevant or burning, and we also try to take the focus on the topic which the industry discusses at large or whispers about, because that depends a little bit on the context of the challenge attached to it. And we work with great mind, Thomas Eskilsson here sitting together with us, who is the author of the report and also the head of the strategy. Normally the flow is always very informal and inclusive, and we come without any ambition of proposing solutions to those huge topics, but what we like to do is to try to listen to different colleagues from different corners of the industry to understand how do they unpack it in their specific national context, regional context, or in relation to the company that they represent. So for that role, we have a great speakers here together with us. Klaus Ladegaard, we can have another slide maybe with all the speakers' names if possible. Klaus is the CEO of Danish Film Institute. Lennart Lernberg is a producer with huge experience, and also before entering producing, you've had an angle towards distribution models as well, representing Stella Nova Films. Jonas Dornbach, a producer from Germany, partner and a producer for Komplizien Film. In all of the cases of the producers, your films are so huge and so known, it would take a day to discuss and give the credit to everyone. And we have Maria from M Films from Lithuania, who is a really driving force in the country, not only producing national fantastic talent, but also being there for many interesting co-productions on regional and international levels. And they will help me to unpack the topic of overproduction. You could also take this event as a teaser into the third edition of the report, which I just mentioned, which will be largely discussing the topic of the overproduction from different perspectives and posing a question if the core focus is in the right direction. What do we mean when we talk about overproduction? Do we need to do less films? Do we need to alter a little bit the traditional distribution models? Maybe something completely different? And someone who's very good to give an intro to this is Thomas, and I give the floor to you to introduce the topic and to maybe also say, Thomas, when will be the full report launching?
Yeah, we should talk about a topic that we often whisper about.
This one is about the whisper.
The whisper discussion about overproduction, because it's often very sensitive to talk about overproduction. But I should try to put this question into a context, and exactly as Tamara said, I will not deliver any form of answers. That's up to you to do, to reflect, to think. But in early next year, when we present the final report, where we also have said that we will be extremely concrete and give solutions. Then, of course, this also will be a topic where we say something very concrete and very clear. And to be able to speak about this at all, we need to understand, as always, that Europe is a very multifaceted continent. You cannot really reflect and understand a topic just from one perspective, because it will look very different in different parts of Europe. So with this said, I will now be less polite and more specific, so to speak. So, yeah. The reality is basically that compared to 20 years ago, we release twice as many films, cinema films, per year globally. And more or less the same type of figures are there for Europe. Perhaps even a little bit more than twice as much. And at the same time, we have had a digitalization. And the digitalization, of course, presents a possibility to actually present, to screen, a lot more films. But in reality, it also presents the possibility and create the possibility to think less is more. It becomes so much simpler to give massive capacity to fewer films, because you can release your content, or you can release commercial content to an extent that that was absolutely impossible only 10 years ago. And that is also something that I mean is very clear in the market. You can also say that best case, and some people will tell you that we have approximately the same amount of screens in Europe. That's best case. But the question is, do we have approximately as many chairs? I'm not sure. And what we definitely not have is a capacity that is fully used. Because from all corners of Europe, you can hear that a way for cinema owners to survive is actually to run with less capacity. So in reality, a lot more films, a possibility to release films on a scale you've never seen before, and an unchanged, in best case, capacity. You can also say that we had, during this period, not only due to the fact of digitalization, but also globalization, we have had a paradigm shift. And as all paradigm shifts in this sector, it means that we have access to a lot more content, where we can basically consume that content whenever we want, wherever we want, and how we want. And that's been the structure of all the previous paradigm shifts. So it's no differ in that sense. And the question is, what does this mean for our willingness to engage not in content at large, but at content and different type of contents in cinemas? Because the interesting thing is that the cinema experience is, again, the top focus. You can say a lot of public funders across Europe for a long period started speaking more or less about cinemas and spoke a lot about platform neutrality. Today, platform neutrality is very seldom talked about, very seldom discussed. Instead, it's different angles on the cinema experience. And that's the prime focus. And we can have a very interesting debate of why it is like that, but we will not have that discussion today because it's a totally different type of discussion. So, a content boom, meaning that we have access to enormously much more content. A paradigm shift, a paradox that we are once again focusing on cinemas. And we should remember that we on stage, I guess we identify like this, and I guess nearly all of you in this room are cinema paradiso romantics. You are strong believers that what you get from being in the silent big room is so much more than you will ever get consuming film in another way. So that's, of course, something that I think is shared both between the sector and the sectors, also public bodies in the sector. But who are we competing with? Is it so simple that it's only the boom, all the content, and the fact that we have only 24 hours per day to actually engage in different type of content? Or is it something else? Because cinema, and I guess some of you will come back to this, cinema is also a going out thing. You leave your home, you do something somewhere else. And what are we then competing with? And the horrible thing is that even if we here are cinema paradiso romantics, a lot of people are not cinema paradiso romantics, but they see other form of experiences that they really enjoy and like. And actually the recovery rate for a lot of things that is not film has been stronger after the pandemic. Might be museum visits, might be going to the theater, going to shows, and by far watching sports and music live. And then we come back to the most talked about question when we stop whispering, because then we can suddenly be quite loud, and that is, who should we blame? Whose fault is this that the recovery rate by and large in Europe is a little bit less than 80% compared to what we had before the pandemics? And we can go back 10 years, it's more or less the same. It's approx 80%, and that's a global figure. It's also important to understand it's not a European figure, it's a global figure, 80%. So who should we blame? You producers, you produce 2 lousy movies, nobody wants to watch them. The distributors, they doesn't care about your movies. They do a very, very poor job. They have no bespoken strategies for different type of films. The theater owners who give all the capacity to the blockbusters and put your film in a very weak position with very few starting times per day, with extremely strange time when the film starts. We public film agencies that supports the wrong movies or too many movies, or the audience. Because I've heard people actually saying it's the audience's fault. It's absolutely the audience's fault that they don't really grasp it, that this is so fantastic. Or is it something else in the funding structure that creates this situation? Because we have a Cold War in Europe, an incentive war, meaning that you can see this in many ways. You can see that the average amount of money that is supporting a movie more and more comes from, more than double up already to 2020, comes from an incentive. I think the figures are much higher today. There is no official statistics yet, but I guess we will see much higher figures. And when one country changes their system, the next country needs to follow suit, because otherwise you lose out. So this is a spiral in Europe, meaning that there exists enormously much more for money for funding films. But is that helping the situation, or is it creating an even worse situation? So what should we do? And that's basically what we should discuss here. So I should say very little, but some of the things we have already heard: more money to fewer, more competitive films. That's something that's really on the table in many countries' reforms of their film and audiovisual policies. Is it better curation? Can we educate the audience in different ways? Everything from small children to grown-ups. And can we really educate them to go to the cinema and see the films? Or can we educate them to be interested in films by and large? Or do we need to do really severe things to really persuade us to go back to the movies and see them as a very strong event. So, or is it something entirely different, something else?
So I understand that this will be the questions that will be tackled in much detail, right, Thomas, later on when next year when the report is launched. But having a bit of a sneak peek in some of the papers in making, if I may say, that are already there, I know that there's might be also the discussion around different models of the solutions, and many of these effects that you just mentioned might call for an option that there is no one solution fit everyone or everything in this context. So going to Denmark, I would like to know, Klaus, if you help us understand what would be your analysis of the paradigm shift, and if there is a question, what shall we do? It's on. It's on. So where would you put the weight in that?
Yeah. Thank you for the invitation to blame someone. I am the outgoing CEO, so I can say whatever I want, and I will.
That was the reason why I wanted.
I've done that for years, but anyway. When I entered the Danish Film Institute more than 15 years ago, there was produced around 1,100 films a year. Now, last year, I think it was 2,400 and still going up. And I don't think it's not the number of films, but maybe more the quality of the films. Are they actually meant to be watched in a cinema, or are they just meant to be watched on a small screen? And you know, I to some extent want to blame the whole direction of the funding system in Europe, because I think that the incentives and the incentives war is not actually, you know, increasing the quality of films that you need to see in a cinema. I think it just increases the number of films. And I think it's a very convenient system for the regions and countries that have incentives, because it creates economic activity. And I also think to a certain extent it's a quite convenient system for producers, because you can actually, it's quite easy to figure out how to get financed, but somehow the audience is left out of the quotation. And I think, you know, I think this is one of the most important discussions we need to have in European cinemas. How do we bring the notion of an audience into the discussion again? And I think it's to some extent is not there today. Of course, you know, I think that incentives is not the right way to you know, fund films, because they are about economic activity and not about cultural value. But I totally recognize that they are there and they won't go away. So I think the one central question now is how do we make selective funding with a cultural aim work best together with the incentives? And I think what we also have to ask ourselves is, what is a film that we need to see at the big screen? Because I think there are films that we need to see on the big screen. Even I'm also a cinema paradiso romantic, although I try not to be.
Thank you, Klaus. I will move to you, Lena. And you will help me understand if I'm right or not. I think there were like 59 Swedish films releasing last year, and if you compare it to I don't know, to 8-10 years ago, this is a really good figure somehow. On the other hand, if I read the figures right, the recovery rate is not really coming along in a positive sense, and there are less audiences in the rooms in this magic of Paradiso than it would be desired. So it would be very interesting to see where do you see, from where does the problem come, but where do you also see the solution short term and the mid term maybe to balance out this element?
Good question. I'm not going to bring up a solution because I can't. But you know, even to me, 59 films last year seems crazy. I know that, Charlotta told me that there were 13 films giving a grant last year, and then there were like 15, 16 for a streamer, and then there were the documentaries. But where the other films come from, I don't know. No one knows. But there were that many films. And the strange thing is that we have really, really low funding also. We have a recovery rate that is like 63 or 65% since the pandemic. We're only above Turkey. We have maybe one of the lowest recovery rates since the pandemic in Sweden. We have also the least funding, the least public funding. It's only Albania, if I'm right, Thomas, that has less money than us. Yeah. So how we can make 59 films a year, I don't know. You have to ask someone else. But we can't continue with this, of course. But it's also, I have to say that we in Sweden are suffering, because I'm a specialist for Sweden. I can't really speak about the whole of Europe. But we have suffered, actually, by very poor leadership for like 15 years. No one has been interested in raising the public fundings. No one has been interested in films, and it's now when we have a new leadership at the Swedish Film Institute that I think something can happen. And it also regarding this overproduction, because it has been a terrible time actually for the producers in Sweden for a long time. And I'm a bit traumatized still, you know. It seems strange to say that, but as also Charlotta said a couple of years, 5 or 6 years ago, you know, the producers in each country, they are so dependent on funding that if the Swedish or the Film Institute says, well, this year only the one-legged producer will get a fund, yeah, there will be a couple that sort of takes away the leg, you know, to get funding, because that's how it works. And we have to realize that it's a very narrow hole you should get into as a producer. I'm sure you agree. So we have so many problems. We need more funding, and we should all get together. All the fundings and the producers should really get together to get more public funding. And the overproduction is, I don't know how to. I think the financiers has to be more. I don't know. How should I say this? But. And it's difficult to identify a film that can reach an audience. That's so difficult. But you need, everyone, all of us, producers, funders, everyone, needs to be better at that.
But do you mean that the audience outreach, or whatever you want to call it, needs to be higher on the policy and the strategy vision of the
of course. Yeah, of course. And also everyone has to be better at identifying the film that someone wants to see, you know, and then we can sort of maybe get away from this overproduction. But also the incentive, the tax incentive in Sweden has been a catastrophe, you know, because we have so little money, and it's no one gets it because it's based on first come, first served. Yeah, first come, first served. So it's just a catastrophe. We have to do something about that. I'm not sure who is going to do anything about it. I made an interview this morning with the Tillväxtverket, as it's called, but you know, the questions were so strange that I don't even think they know how we work, you know. So we have Sweden is a black sheep in Europe right now, actually.
Thank you. Jonas, I'm coming to you, and there's been so many events discussing, or rather raising a question, was it going to happen in Germany? There's been a lot of interpretation of this as well, so obviously there is a reform rolling out, and the idea and the logic behind it is to support German producers and to raise the number and the quality of German films. It's been presented at different events from different angles, but your company and many other companies in Germany are really the ones that on one hand produce core talent that comes out of Germany, but you also co-produce globally with the world. And I wonder, where do you stand in this anticipation of the reform? What is it in a nutshell for you, and what is the main weight that it's going to bring in for the change somehow?
So the reform, in a nutshell, is basically the title of our panel here is like, okay, let's do less films, but those films with more money. So that was the idea. So.
And
like,
that is still the idea? Less films with more money?
Yeah, that's the idea. And it's also really black on white. So it's not and I know that in many countries people try to avoid this topic, but in Germany now it's really, okay, let's really do less films. I think last year we had 230 German films released in the cinema. So it's really a topic that the industry now addressed. And in a nutshell, now it's coming down to 3 major changes. So the first pillar is to really have a bigger tax incentive. Right now it's on 20% and to bring it up to 30%. But those 30% to be real 30%, because now we have 20, but those in reality are 16 because you cannot put in music rights and blah, 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 so on and so on. So to have real 30% tax incentive. The second pillar is to have the investigation obligation by the streamers. And that would be, it's orientated on the French model, like on 20%. There, the only difference between Germany and France would be that in Germany you could only use this money for high-end series and TV. I think in France you're able to invest it also in cinema. But that reform, there's a huge lobby from all the streaming platforms against it. So that is the one that is mostly challenged. And the third one is basically our main federal fund, which is called FFA, to really totally restructure it into an automatic fund. And that would be based on a point system, so that you would get for a certain amount of viewers in the cinema, you would get, I don't know, you make 100,000 admissions, that's 100,000 points. It will be quoted by €1.10, so you would get 110,000 euro for your next film. And then on a festival, you would run in Cannes in competition, you would get another 100,000. You will the Golden Palm, 200,000, and so on. So it's a whole point system. And they would use the money that before was in the fund. They would invest it to this automatic fund, and they would leave a certain amount for very, let's say, art house and documentary films that still would go via jury. Yeah. So these are the 3 pillars in the concept to.
So the automatic fund would be much bigger, if I may say,
Yes.
than the element that is left for the selective funding.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the idea behind it is to say, okay, the producer would be able to finance roughly 25% out of this automatic fund, 30% with the tax rebate, so that you have 50% of your financing in place, and then you could go to regional funds and TV and co-production, whatever. So that's the idea, and the idea is so that if you make films that are very successful in cinema, you get a lot of points, you get a lot of money. If you make films that are very successful on a festival level or awards campaign, you would also get. So it's this kind of division, or in the best case you have both, a film that is fulfilling both. Yeah. So I think in theory what could happen that you would have less films, because I think a kind of a middle film, what I think Thomas you were saying, Klaus, or you were saying that every film in our industry has to go to cinema, and that's, I think it's a challenge that once you start to get funding from the government, then this film must go into cinema. So, and I think we start sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't turn out like we thought it would turn out. Yeah? And I think it's, in my opinion, personally, I think it's totally okay to say, listen, I tried, it didn't work out. But then if you have to put it in the cinema, then you're, in a way, you're blocking the whole system. Yeah? So, and I think the other challenge is that as we are, or most of the producers, at least our company is earning by producing a lot. So it really means that we have to.
What do you mean exactly, earning by producing?
So it means that if I have to do a movie in order to finance my company.
Yeah.
It's not very revenue based.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge challenge, because what we see is that a lot of films are starting to film and they're not fully financed, because what we have funding system, at least in Germany a lot, is that you apply for a certain amount and then you get cut and they give you ask for 100, they give you 80 or 70. Yeah? And what is the result of it? That your film is not fully financed, and you go into production, and you go into production with a film that is only 75% financed, and then you start to cut on the script and on the shooting days and so on and so on. And I think in the market we're right now living is, no, your film has to be really good in order to compete with all those other films. So it's if you have that, if you compromise already on the shooting moment, it's very, very challenging. So I think let's see how this reform turns out. But I think at least it's a try to really have more financing for your film and to really do less.
And if that all happens with this ambition that that you really well outlined now from producer perspective, do you think it will contribute to the competitiveness of German films?
I think so. I think on the one hand, of course, we're looking to re-attract films from outside, like it used to be in the 2010s, where many American films were shot in Berlin and in Germany, and then they all went to other countries. So that's on the one hand, and I really hope that that you will have more time in the development, and that you really will be able to capitalize more the companies. Yeah? So I think a company like ours with 17 employees, we have 20 projects in development. So now it's a certain size that we have to maintain. So and I think we are maybe the last or one of the last company in this size in Germany that is independent. Of course, you have other companies that now have shareholders of whatever company, but in order to maintain this kind of ecosystem, I think it's needed.
Thank you very much. When Thomas and I discuss about different kind of contexts, we always say that it's super interesting to see things from the perspectives which are linked to certain regions, let's say, or the cultural context of coming out of planned economy and entering the new policy audiovisual sector in baby steps, let's say. And if I was a Georgian producer, for instance, right now, and if I was listening to two dear colleagues discussing so much challenges, I would think that really, Sweden and Germany have challenges. Look what's happening in my country, and see this and that element in the flow. And I think, Maria, you're representing a country that is really having a steady development somehow. And when I observe and when I follow your talent, because I have interest to do it, there is always a new name, always a local strong producer following the talent to be emerging on the international scenery. So I wonder, when we approached you and when we asked you this question, how would you see the overproduction, whether it's even a question for you within the Lithuanian context or Baltic context? What were your first thoughts, and what was like a case that would come to your mind?
So my first reaction was, finally, we may not whisper, we may talk about it. So I think it's a great opportunity to do that. We have absolutely the same problems, but just slightly differently nuanced, because it's a smaller scale, but exactly the same issues. So like if Sweden has 59 films released, we have 27 released, and we're a 2.8 million country. So this is really like huge. The films, they cannot do what they used to do in the cinemas, and the Lithuanian audience is very supportive for national cinema. We have share of 20-25% still back like 3-4 years ago. Now it's dropped down to 18-20. So it's really our revenues that used to be very relevant, and it's not that much anymore. And the same goes to the producing. We have at least 16-18 films produced every year. So for our country, it's again quite a lot. So I'm really a big supporter of the idea of more funding for less films. And this is something we also, Lena, she was saying something like we lacked leadership for some recent years. So I think we really lack leadership, either from the funds or from the producers, to put us together at the table and finally agree. that, okay, more funding for less films, what, let's say, Germany did already. And this would really won't be a very popular decision, I know. Maybe that's why some funds are still hesitant to either talk about it or take action. But I think it's the sooner the better, because we're just postponing a very important decision and making things worse, both for the industry, for the audiences, for the funds. Everybody's just struggling. So I think the sooner the better. This leadership is really in taken by the funds or the producers, or both. We would benefit from it way much more.
Thank you so much for all of you being so direct and on topic. I think we failed completely, Thomas, on whisper element of it. It's, but
I thought we were going to have a strong conflict here among you, but we totally.
But that's we're happy with that. And I have a question to you, Thomas, right now. I think a lot of it is leading to the much bigger need of creating a shift on the policy level decision as well, and sort of acknowledging it and trying to find ways around it, if not the common way, but some of the models that may work in different territories. Is that something you're anticipating? Is it something that's also coming up?
Yeah, absolutely, and it will not be a simple task, because you can very clearly see that within Europe we work inside we think we work in a very common way, in the same type of framework, whatever. But you can say we work inside traditions and inside different type of thinkings. So if you look at, for instance, the Nordic countries and what type of mission statements they have, what type of portal paragraphs in their film policies, you can say that they look 180-degree different than, for instance, the one in France. And surprisingly enough, it's more culture in the Nordic one than in the French one. Whatever we think, because the French one is very much about the French audiovisual industry and the French territory and things like that. But on the other hand, that might be a product, because film has since long been seen as an art form. So it's difficult, but of course the conclusion and the discussion will look very different, because in a system where you put the industry as the core focus, the risk is that you will say, but we will need more companies. We don't need stronger companies, we need more companies, because when you should measure yourself as a public body, figures is important. So it might be more interesting to tell the politicians that we have zillion billion production companies than we have 8 really strong production companies. So I think that will be something that is a challenge in certain territories, because then the topic will be even more difficult. And then I think there is something that is also that there's not different position, but I think it will inflict the discussion, and that's basically how we will understand cinema in the future, going to the movies in the future. And it's not only about romanticism, but it's how do we understand that element in our film policies, in our audiovisual policies. And if it's super core, then those territories that think this is the most important thing, I think they have a bigger challenge, because then they really need to achieve this. They need to create solutions when we really choose to see the films in the big silent room and not somewhere else. Because you can see a slight difference here, because you have countries that are totally fixated because we need more transparency, we need to get hold of the streamers' figures, we need to measure our films total, you could say, how many have seen it in total, not only in cinemas. And you have those that are more or less leaning in even more to figures linked to exhibition. So I think there is many. It will not be one single road in Europe. I think it will be different roads. But I think in the end of the day, everybody, perhaps not everybody, because you have certain problems here. Yeah, but let's say, I know, is there anyone from Spain here? No? No? One there from Spain? I mean, the Spanish challenge will be that you suddenly have the most generous incentive system in more or less, more or less the world, I will say, the most generous incentive system. And how should you then discuss, because there is very many Spanish releases, so I think the topic could be understood from a Spanish perspective. But if you have an automatic system that is so enormously strong, how can you then change? Or is it possible even to see change in such a system? And that could also be shared with countries with similar type of systems, but since the Spanish is by far the most generous, I will say the problem is probably bigger there than in many other places. And so I think this is and then we are back to a question that we have discussed before, and particularly where me and Klaus is very good friends, and that's about coherence. If you should have a film and audiovisual policy, how will it be coherent? And the challenge for systems with strong incentive funding is bigger and more difficult than it is in systems where the balance looks different. Because how should you then create? And I will say, I think the trend and tendency in Europe will be, even if you can debate and discuss it, will be that to integrate incentives in the film agency's activities. So not incentives handled by bodies outside film agencies, handled by the film agency. But what does that mean for a film agency?
Yeah.
A very interesting example right now is the Greek Film Center, and the Greek incentive handled by ECOMO should now be put together, and probably under the Greek Film Center. But the balance is that the incentives is more or less 6 or 7 times bigger than what exists as selective funding. And who will then run the show?
And I would like to ask this to you, Klaus, your comments that you wanted to.
Yeah, but just to picking up on what Thomas is saying, you know, it's so extremely different, you know, in Greece, it's a minority of the funding coming from a selective funding scheme. In the Nordic countries, it's a minority coming from a incentive. In Denmark, we don't have any incentive. But I think the coherence question is extremely important. For years, there have been a notion at the traditional cultural funds that if there is an incentive, someone else has to take care of it. And I think we have to revise that notion and say incentives should be administered by the public funds, because we need them to work much better, collaborate in a much better way. One thing is, we need to have all the incentives also being able to fund films that are not going abroad but shooting at home, and make it attractive to shoot at home. I think so. This is just one thing that we have to figure out how to do. But I think the whole coherence question, and how do we establish collaboration between selective funds and incentives and automatic funds? I think this is key for the years to come, and the answers will be quite different if you try to answer them for Norway, or if you try to answer them for Greece. So this is one of the challenges, I think. Just to picking up on what you said about, should all films go to the cinema? I don't think they should. I think we should kind of reinvent the name made for TV movies, or made for streaming movies, and that they should just go on streaming or TV, and they can be funded by the streamers or by TV. I think as cultural public funded, I think we should actually say we want everything to go into the cinema. I think it was Villeneuve who said when Dune 2 had premiere that the big screen is actually part of the film language, and I think that's true. If we don't work with the big screen, we will have kind of different language in film, and I think that would be really be a pity. On the other hand, we do films that are, when we see the result, which are not good enough for the cinema, they should not go to the cinema. I totally agree, and I also agree, and it's very difficult to identify a film that can reach a big audience. That's true, but maybe it's not that difficult to identify a film that can't reach a big audience. And I think this is also a responsibility for the funds to be better to say, this is actually not a film for the big screen.
But then the topic of curation is coming up also from the perspective of the fans in this case. And is that something you would also, for instance, you, Maria, is that something that you would also want to see, that when you start applying and where you devise a producing strategy for a certain film, you know that within your fund or institution there are different areas, like different alleys you could get a support from and be very focused rather than try chances all the time?
I think when it comes to my fund, we pretty know well what kind of film can be funded. So that hasn't changed that much. But because we're a small territory, we always co-produce to make the films, just being able to make them and to be competitive as well. We always co-produce, and that really happened in many partner countries. They say, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, we would know if we get the funding for that kind of film or no. Now we cannot tell. It's like it became more like a gambling game. So they are like, we have to do like 3 different applications with totally different projects and try to see which one of them will get the funding. So this is something that is happening, and also, of course, the fact that the funds give less money to the projects. We have to, instead of doing 2-country co-production, we have to do 3-country co-production or 4-country co-production. So this is something also that makes the situation even more complicated. I also wanted, maybe if I can, to react a bit on the incentives. Just to say something, I really agree that we can change the way it's administrated and the way it's given to the projects. But also I want to say how important it is for, again, smaller territories like ours, even for the local films, like in Lithuania, 30% of the budget comes from incentives. This really helps us to make much more competitive films. So. And also a lot of Scandinavian countries, Nordic countries, who don't have incentives, they come to use the incentives here as well, which in a way helps the industry and doesn't help. There are 2 sides of the rainbow, I know it, but it also helps the industry run throughout the year, and also helps the local projects.
You told me before this panel that you have 55 millions. And we have 10. So I mean, it's nothing, and it all goes to TV series. As a feature film producer, it's really hard to get the incentive, which it isn't if we go to Lithuania. So there are all sorts of incentives, that there are different for each country. I suppose you know everything about that. But in Sweden, it hasn't worked at all, I would say, even though I got one, for a film.
Thank you very much. Well, time is always ticking during these panels, and I would still like to take 1 or 2 questions if anyone wants to give a comment or question, and if not, then we will need to thank our panelists very soon. But please raise your hand if there is an intervention or a question that's still boiling in the room. No? Thomas, you have 1 minute to wrap, and then we will need to give much applause to our guests, right?
Yeah, I think we have had a good discussion where we have touched upon this very it's the first time I actually been in a panel where everybody can agree that this problem exists. Last year I was in the European Audiovisual Observatory panel together, and in that quite big panel, it was a French and a Spanish producer. They totally disagreed There is absolutely no overproduction problem. There is total logic that we produce those massive amounts of films in our countries, even if they have no audience, because there is other reasons why they should be made. And of course, that's a take as well. So I think this is a proof that this is a very complex question that you can look at from very many different angles, and in the end of the day, the answer will not be one, it will probably be a couple.
Thank you very much for being here, and thanks a lot for helping us to unpack the topic. Thank you.